regular meeting for Tuesday, April 28th, 2022. Public opportunities to discuss matters of public interest within the committee's scope, including items on or not on the agenda, are available. Are there any speakers?
I do not have any speakers with us this evening. Art, can you double check our virtual attendees?
There are no additional attendees.
No additional attendees.
Having none, we'll move on to the consent items. So with the consent agenda items, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion, we adopt consent.
A motion, I'll second it. We have a, will the board clerk call the roll?
Yes, Director Wood
Aye.
and Rosali.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Moving then to the presentation items. Finance report through February 28th, 2022. CFO Dave O'Toole. Good evening.
Ready to go. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Director Woods, Chief Wagaman. Tonight's bi-monthly fiscal presentation highlights the fiscal trends to help you monitor overall financial health of the district. And this presentation is drawn from the Finance Committee reports that you received in your package, which are from July 1 to the end of February 28th. The first slide here, there we go. Cash balance trends as of February 28th is shows that we're following historical trends in terms of where we spend into the dry period and cash goes negative. We borrow from the county. We get property taxes in December or January timeframe. The number goes up. So we're following that historical trend. The green line is prior year for reference. The red line is current. Let's see, at the end of February, we're close to the same as last year at 27.6 million. The dots are pretty close together there. The green line is actually, excuse me, the red line is following actually more of a historical pattern. So when you do see that gap between in November to December, as we discussed at our last meeting, that was because the revenues were recorded last year a little early, but the red line is more typical. So moving on from cash balances to revenues. Let's see, there we go. This slide shows us tracking with the expected general fund revenues after 8 months. And there are 3 lines on this chart, all kind of tracking closely together again. The red line is your current year number. The blue line is the budgeted revenues as recorded in the mid-year. So we're for this presentation, we're using mid-year numbers where we present a budget comparison. And the green line is past year. We've now received 137.6 million or 53.7% of projected revenues. That's about 4.5 million more than we received last year. Next, we'll move our attention over to the more evenly generated revenue source. The line shows medic cost revenues or recoveries. These EMS revenues are tracking pretty close to the budgeted blue line. Total anticipated annual medic cost revenue as adjusted by the mid-year budget again is 45.6 million. So it's how much we expect to get this fiscal year. At the end of February, we received about 29.7. So we're about 2/3 of the way there after 2/3 of the calendar year completed. The red line, as you can notice, is a little bit above the blue line. That's about a difference of about $1 million. And that's basically where the revenues came in a little earlier than expected, but doesn't change our overall anticipated forecast of 45.6 million. Let's see, overall medic cost revenues are about 2.5 million over last year's revenue. That's the difference between the red and the green line. So next, let's take a look at expenditures with general fund expenditures. Go. Okay. After 8 months, general fund expenditures relative to the updated mid-year budget were close to the same. Expenditures were 171.4 million and equated to about 66.4% of the total annual budget. So tracking pretty close to having been 2/3 done with the calendar with the fiscal year. Relative to last fiscal year, expenditures at the end of February were $10.4 million higher. That's where we saw that uptick where you see in the red line. It's reflected in January, February, and March, is reflecting the changes that we talked about when we were adjusting the mid-year. We had about a $10 million increase, forecasted increase in combination of some labor costs, the constant staffing, but we about 8 million we put there, and about $1 million in services supplies. So let's look at one of those more carefully, moving on to labor expense, salary and benefit, excuse me. You can see that after 8 months, labor costs are above the mid-year budgeted blue line number, now 2.9% above the level anticipated by February end. By the end of February, employee wages remained high relative to prior year because of mainly because of the constant staffing callbacks. That was a big piece of it. So for those of us who unfamiliar with the constant staffing callbacks, the overtime costs generated when suppression staff are called out and other staff have to come in and fill in for them. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, would you go over that again?
Sure. From the beginning. So this is our chart on salary and benefit. After 8 months, we've got the budget number is now 2.9% above the level anticipated in the budget, in the mid-year budget. And the biggest factor that we point to in that overage is constant staffing, which we had added about 8 million in the mid-year budget to cover that overage.
Okay, thank you.
Overall, looking at again the kind of the annualized look after 8 months or 2/3 of the fiscal year, we are at 62.5% of the revised mid-year. So we're tracking. We're even tracking a little bit under at the end of February on an annualized look in terms of underspending. Let's see. Some of this increase is also due to deployments. To reserves. Okay, here again, the green line is your prior year. Yep.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rizzo. Is in that prior slide,
Yeah.
the 2.9% over budget still exists even after that $8 million adjustment we made at mid-year?
Yes.
Okay. So the $8 million adjustment wasn't enough to cover the actual.
This is at that point in February, we still got 4 months to go. So, but the way that the trajectory is we will, as it kind of continued on, is it looks like we're going to come under based on, we've only spent 60.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. There we go. Moving on to reserves. Again, here the green is our prior year, red is our actuals. Reserves at the end of February were higher than last year at this point. 5.5 million above the current year red line. We actually started out our second dip into the county cash borrowing about this time, so that's what's reflected there. Moving on to the California Employers Retirement Benefit Trust, or CERT. Kind of a familiar slide. Again, just a reminder, this is not a cash fund, and monies in this trust can only be used to pay for future OPEB costs, such as retiree health premiums. The total that you see there, total balance 72.175 is the total in the total we have for OPEB funding. The total OPEB the total OPEB liability is 243.9 million. So if you put those together, about 30% funded on our OPEB liabilities. Some key takeaways for this.
One question here. We're about 30% funded on it. If you were to project out, when would you estimate it will be half or fully funded?
I mean, it's tough to on the fly to give you an estimate because of the market conditions.
Sure.
You can, the market conditions were great on June 30th of last year. Right now, we're looking at something much more, much less optimistic. So I could go back and
No. Just, I'm curious because I'm very pleased with what Metro has done.
Mhm.
You can see from going back to 2013,
when you first started funding it. Yeah.
and we started photos, what Metro has accomplished, very impressive.
Yeah.
And I'd love to think that the time will come when Metro is fully funded, and so that prompts the question. So thank you.
Okay. This last slide we have here is the major takeaways. So the cash balance rebounded after 8 months, mainly due to the timing of the property tax receivables. Cash is right where we were about the same time last year. Spending is right in line. We were at mid-year budget at with the adjusted mid-year budget, 66.4% of the budget at February end. Labor costs and constant staffing slowed against the mid-year budget augmentation of 8.9 million. And then general fund reserves fell below the budget level relative to last year by 5.5 million. Let's see, that's the end of my presentation. It's for receive and file only, no action needed. Welcome your questions.
Thank you.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Sure. And just as a note for next month when we meet, we'll be looking at the preliminary budget for 22-23. So reserve our seats now.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair. Yes, apologies. I apologize for being so late. I did get some questions. Are these questions to be asked at this time? All right, thank you very much. Okay. Salary and benefits slide. Labor costs and constant staffing have slowed, but salary costs are actually up compared to projections. Now, can you help us differentiate the reason why?
Let's find the right slide here. This was in the board package. Okay. Yeah, so you're referring to after the 8 months, we're 2.9. I want to pull the presentation back, I could show you, but we're 2.9% above the level anticipated at February end. And so you're, can you, the question was again?
Okay. I have a point of question about procedure, if you could bear with me for 30 seconds.
Sure.
Now, if a fellow, my understanding is, although that fellow directors can speak at the podium, they just can't sit here and vote on the committee. Is that correct or not?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I understand that when a committee is meeting, only the 3 directors should be sitting up here at the dais. But my recollection is that if other directors wanted to comment, they could come to the podium and comment as an open public session.
Just offhand, I can't think of why not.
Exactly.
Let's.
I will
let's-
count.
let's-
Good.
Let me defer to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. So, Madam Clerk.
I don't think it's been our practice in the past to have board members participate in the committees.
It's not in the committee, it's from the public dais.
As if they were speaking for public interest.
Yeah, if they would want to comment from the dais and ask questions, I think it would be up to the chair if we have time and if that's going to be allowed.
Director Jones, does such a circumstance exist tonight?
Yes, it does.
And what I just heard the clerk say was it was up to me.
I throw myself on the mercy of the court.
Okay, so is there anything in it for me?
Yes, I happen to have a Rice Krispie treat for you.
Okay, so please, if we have someone who would like to speak, let's do that.
We can
Okay.
get clarification from legal counsel going forward, and then make an exception tonight, if that's okay with everyone.
Sure.
Fine with me.
Okay, so I'm not able to step more into these questions. So do you want to, Director Sailors, or shall we just go ahead and carry on?
Can I read them?
Sure. And it would be the podium, the regular podium.
I can't do this from memory. So. If the labor cost and constant staffing has slowed, but the salary costs are actually up compared to projections, can you explain why?
This is a point in time, the February number was 2.9 million over, talking to everyone here. And, you know, that's a point in time. I don't think we can, I can say at the end of February, that's not indicative of where we are today. So we'll have an update when we do the prelim on it, but it's not a long-term trend.
Okay. So on your takeaway slide, spending is in line. So let's go to the takeaway slide. Spending is in line only after a large mid-year adjustment to fill in a budget deficit. We got that
That
12.
reflects the mid-year changes.
12 million deficit. Okay. How much money was taken from the IGT, GEMT, leased properties, grants, capital facilities, and reserves to balance the budget at mid-year?
Okay. The IGT was 4.6. The lease revenues, I don't have the number offhand. It's around 1 million. I can get to the exact figure. So there's a lease was 1 point something, 3 maybe, and then the capital facilities was around the same number, 1 point.
If I could interject,
Okay, and then the general fund was 2.1.
Okay, the chair.
if I could interject for a second, these questions are important, but I recognize that it's really difficult on the fly to respond with any kind of detail. If you could provide those questions to Mr. O'Toole and allow him to respond at some point through an email that went to us, we'd appreciate it.
Or as part of the presentation on the 26th.
Sure, go ahead.
Or as part of the presentation on the 26th, so that those questions that can be answered in appropriate detail.
That's
I just don't think it's fair to Mr. O'Toole to ask him to pull numbers out of the air. That's the kind of stuff I do.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for that consideration. I appreciate it. I think the main point here is on bullet number 2 with the takeaway. Spending is right in line with mid-year budget. Well, that's after a great deal of work
Adjustment.
within adjustment. Thank you. That's the word. I mean, so if someone came from the public right now and read that, they think everything's just fine and dandy. But as we all know, it wasn't, and it was very, very difficult to try to put this in balance, because if we're, early February, we're told we have 12 million plus, and then in March, we're told we're minus 12. Well, that's 24, folks. So these are very serious considerations, and I appreciate, Mr. Chair, that we are able to take the time to
Absolutely.
plan for some future information.
Please, thank you for your presentation. Are there other issues? Seeing none. The next meeting of this committee will be May 26th, 2022. And this will be the presentation of the anticipated action presentation items for the preliminary budget. Seeing no further action, this meeting's adjourned.